Hi, Erin. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for being here. It's a real pleasure having you here. For the sake of people that started coming in, shall we just start?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, good. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Mireed Hoffman. I am an elder law lawyer and a gerontologist, and my office focuses mainly on helping senior citizens when they reach significant junctions in their life, talking mainly about wills and enduring power of attorney, guardianship issues, and also prenups for second or third relationships. And from my broad exposure with this age group, I found that there's a lot of other issues that relate to senior citizens that are not discussed or not discussed of a, um, a much, or they're not enough people know about it. And therefore, I've created this podcast called Golden Topics, Significant Crossroads for Seniors, where I have conversations with other professionals that also deal with issues to do with senior citizens. And today we're going to be talking about um, investments and legal considerations in second relationships. And I'm going to be talking about it with Aaron Katzman. Aaron Katzman is president and CEO of Lighthouse Capital, which is a boutique wealth management firm based in Yerushalayim. He has over 20 years of experience helping people open and manage their investment accounts. So thank you so much, Aaron, for being here with me. And why don't you introduce yourself?
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me. As you said, I'm the president and CEO of Lighthouse Capital. We work with clients who want to have investment accounts in the United States. We do financial planning for them to really understand and drill down what their goals are and what their needs are. And then we go ahead with them and then execute the plan, invest their money in the States so that they can fulfill and achieve their goals and their needs.
Sounds awesome. Okay, so I was thinking about how we're going to start this conversation about second relationships. And then I was thinking, when I talk about estate planning and second relationships, I always start to think about why people would want to do it. And I think, in second relationships, there's a combination. You want security in your relationship, but you also want independence, especially if you're bringing money from a previous marriage or a divorce or from accumulated work or whatever it is from an outside source, which is not this new relationship. And I always tell people that estate planning actually gives you both. It gives you the security and the independence because of a few reasons. First of all, it maintains control of your pre-marriage assets. It clarifies expectations and respects each other's financial independence. It also minimizes potential disputes over financial issues, and it also addresses potential, scenarios up front so that you're not thinking about what will I do, what will I do, how will I act, how will he act, and make it very, things are sort of written there. It's very black and white. It's very clear. And then you can just, go on with your life, whatever it may be. I'm just wondering what your intake on is on that and how you see it from your side.
It's really, really important, right? I mean, I can ask you and you can tell everybody. I'll throw a question right back at you and you'll give the answer, then I'll continue. But for people who don't have like a will, right? What happens when one of the spouses dies?
Okay, so I mean, it's very tricky, especially in blended families, because if you don't have a will, what happens is that let's take an example, a house, which is usually, registered 50-50, let's say. So the person that passes away, his 50% gets divided to two. It gets divided between the new spouse in this case, which is not the other parent, okay, and his children from maybe his former marriage. So now you have a house which is basically shared with this new spouse and the children. Now, we don't know what the relationship is necessarily between those two. And even let's say the relationship is great, but the children might want the money. They might need the money. They want to, so they have different interests and they might want to either, tell the widows, buy us out or let's rent out the place or let's sell the place. And she might have completely different ideas, especially if she's in her late 70s, early 80s. She's getting on. She doesn't necessarily want to just move. It becomes an issue.
So for sure, and that's the reason I think in a nutshell that especially, I mean, I think everybody should as they age, but especially when you're talking about second marriages, it's so critical to get things formulated, written down in some kind of official document, right? Whether that's a will or a trust or whatever it is, so that everybody's wishes and that everybody's needs are written out, and there's no room for dispute. I know a case. It's exactly what you're talking about. The couple were in their 80s, and he owned the apartment, and he had a bunch of kids, and he passed away. And their unwritten agreement was that she can stay in the apartment as long as she is alive. But it was an unwritten agreement. And then the kids got involved, and it was, in a very, very upscale neighborhood in Jerusalem, and they wanted their money. And they didn't really care for their stepmother. And their stepmother was in her 80s, and she wasn't doing very well. And to make a long story short, she moved back to America to be with her children. And they basically just forced her out. They strong armed her out. They made life miserable for her. She got on an airplane and left, and they went ahead and sold the apartment.
Wow.
So it's so important to do that so that, you know, that everybody's ultimately taking care of their own, right? Because what I don't have to tell you, but what ends up happening is, if it's not written down and codified, your children that you're bringing into this second relationship, your children might not get taken care of. And
Absolutely.
ultimately, we all sort of want that, right? We all want our kids to be taken care. We want what's good for us, for ourselves as we age and then we have a second relationship, whatever. But we also obviously want our kids to be taken care of. And if you don't do things correctly and you don't take this seriously, you're going to be in for a rude, or you're going to be gone, but they're going to be in for a really, really rude awakening.
100%. I was just thinking about that. There was a case, um, they came to me to prepare a will, the blended people in a second relationship, and they said she was going to move into his house, and he said to me, I want her to stay indefinitely, meaning if I pass away, she can stay there until the end of her life. And that's also not necessarily a good thing because you want her to live a very long life afterwards. You don't know how long that's going to be. Could be 10 years, could be 15 years, could be 5 years. You don't know. The children do need that money at some point, especially in this case, it was his only asset. I mean, he had nothing really, he had like nothing in the bank. Um, and that can cause tension, even in cases where there isn't necessarily tension, because, oh, wait a minute, I just got inheritance from dad, but oh, hang on, I can't do anything with it because and it's not my mom, gets to stay there for, her entire lifespan. And for her, I said to her, that's also not something that you want. You don't want to end this relationship with your not stepchildren, but your husband's children in a bad way. I mean, you've had like, I don't know, 10 years together and it was a good relationship. You want to leave it like that. You want to keep a good relationship with them. I wouldn't stay there indefinitely. It's not the right thing to do. So, make it has to be a balance, but that's the whole thing. You need to discuss it in order to think about the balance.
And I think that's also, I remember we spoke about this a while back, but it's also a function, fortunately or unfortunately, of what kind of assets you have. There's an issue out there that even if you end up really, everybody divides and everybody figures out what they're going to do, and what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, and we'll have a joint bank account where we'll deal with monthly expenses. There's the other issue which comes up about just like, okay, where are we going to live? And I know more than one case where um, one of the spouse they end up living in one of the spouse's homes, and that creates its own set of issues. There's like a power that goes on there, right? There's like this tension because you're living in my apartment, right? We're equals but not really equals, right? Because
Right.
it's my big, big asset and we are sharing it. So in certain respects, you are going to be sort of, I don't want to say subservient, but you've got the upper hand. And, I like to recommend if there's enough assets possible that they buy something neutral together or they rent something neutral because I've just seen it. I've seen people in my office and when I'm going through their financial life, and they say, "Yeah, we've got what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, and we have a joint bank account, and I pay for the utilities, and she pays for the food." And I said, "Okay, great. And where are you living?" And she goes, "Oh, we're living in her apartment." And you see sort of like a little bit of a, she makes a little bit of a gesture, you see a little bit of a smile, and you see his eyes when he says it sort of like roll a little bit, and you know that it's not, it's a little bit complicated.
100% is so true. I also recommend it if they can afford it. Sometimes a lot, not a lot of times, but often they will come with their own assets that they have. If that's a possibility, I would keep them to have their own assets, rent it out, and use that rental money for something completely new, which is not mine, not yours. And then, we both have an equal say in stupid things, how we want to furnish it, how much light do we want to put in it, Shabbos clocks, because it's not really your house. I get a say to it. I'm paying the bill just like you are. All these like stupid things that can actually snowball. And also when the children come, it's not, oh, you're sleeping in my old bedroom or you're sleeping in, God forbid, my mom's old bedroom. Like that's even worse, I think. This way, it's like neutral. It's not yours. It's not mine. We're building something new together.
Sure.
Yeah. And
Very
that
important.
actually brings me into another subject, the enduring power of attorney. Just as a recap for people who don't know what the enduring power of attorney is, the enduring power of attorney is a document that you prepare in advance for situations where, God forbid, you're no longer mentally capable of handling your own affairs. And through this document, it's like a plan, planning your life what if, sort of like a insurance policy that you're planning somebody who will handle your affairs if you're no longer capable of doing so according to specific instructions that you yourself put in. Now, when we're talking about second relationships and she moves in, let's say, to his house, then there's always the question of, first of all, who's going to be the power of attorney? Is it going to be him? Is it going to be her kids? And then what happens if she needs a caregiver? Who's going to make that decision? If she's putting her kids on this enduring power of attorney as the ones who make the decisions, but they are actually going to decide about a caregiver in his house. I mean, doesn't he have a say? And then there's always the question of what happens. Okay, it's his house. What happens if he has to be moved to a facility as he gets older for whatever reason? Does she get to stay in the house? It's questions that people don't want to think about because they're not pleasant things to think about, but they are crucial to think about it when you're both capable of thinking about it.
100%. 100%. We have a case just now where a lady was diagnosed with early stage dementia. And it was a second marriage for both of them. And she said, "Oh, I want my new husband to be my power of attorney. And he can make all the investment decisions and he can transfer money." And what they told their kids, I don't know. But I could see how that, doesn't necessarily look good. It certainly opens up a Pandora's box. I'm not saying, right, they're honest people and they're good people, and I don't suspect anything. But when it comes to money, unfortunately, the worst character traits come out in people. And it pays to have a conversation, right? An in-depth conversation and really, really talk it out and then codify it and write it down and make sure everybody's on the same wavelength, and also the kids, because ultimately we want peace. We want harmony at the end of the day. We don't want everybody fighting with each other. And there's so much room here for dispute that it really just behooves the people to talk it out.
Absolutely. You so touched on the ball when you said we want peace, we want harmony. And people's like, don't talk to me about these things. Naimly, it's like hard subjects. I don't want to get into a argument with my kids. And like, that's exactly why we need to talk about it now. Now, when you're perfectly capable of expressing what you want and explaining it also to the kids because you want harmony, because you don't want arguments later, you want to make sure that things are covered so that you don't have, they don't have to second guess and they know what you want. And if there are issues, and now you're sorting it out now for your future so that you can, live in peace with them and they can be in peace with it as well.
For sure.
There's so many issues. Like, I had a client, they have a joint account, it's very normal. They opened up a joint account and I asked him, okay, and how does it work with the joint account? How much money do each of you put in this joint account? And he goes, "Oh, I don't know, have a clue. She decides. She tells me how much, and I just put in." And I'm thinking, okay, and what's going to happen when there's an enduring power of attorney? Who's going to make that decision? And he goes, "Oh, she'll decide." And I was like, I don't know if that's going to be such a good idea for your kids that she gets to decide. and the kids are just going to put money in this joint account. And is it a good idea for the kids to be joint in this account now with this new person, which is again not their parent? I mean, it's hard enough to have an enduring power of attorney with a parent and a child, but just because, it's hard. The parent loses his his independence by the fact that there's another child telling him or watching over this account with him. So imagine when it's not your parent and you're in account. I said to him, maybe it would be a good idea to split the account at that point and just, everybody has their own accounts, maybe sort of another way of paying bills, maybe from each of your account to a certain level. You have to get creative when it comes to these things.
For sure. And I see it also, you're talking about the joint accounts, you see it sort of on the brokerage side with people who age, doesn't matter. Again, if they're in first marriages, second marriages, if they're single, there comes a point where you need to put somebody else on the account where you may not be able to make decisions.
Right.
Uh, or in preparation for the time where you might become incapacitated. And that's the time where you really may need the money, right? It's grown all these years and you haven't had to do too much. And the exact time when you need the money, God forbid you had some kind of a medical thing, a stroke, God forbid, right? And you can't talk, you can't make decisions, and you need a good chunk of money to be available for you at a moment's notice, and you're stuck. And it's so important for somebody to put somebody else on that account. I would recommend, like you said, a child, because putting somebody else who's in the same situation is not a sustainable solution, right? So you've got to
Right.
put a child that you trust on there so that you have access to the funds. And we've seen it multiple times where they didn't do that, wasn't done, and it's just catastrophe. And there's nothing you can do. You can't access the
Absolutely.
money. Nobody can do. We can't cheat. We can't lie, and the money gets frozen. So it's really important. All these are all the same issue, right? In very respects, and you really have to, like you said, lo naim, but you really have to sit down and talk these things out because it's so important.
So important to talk about it. There's something completely different that I just thought about. I had quite a while ago a blended family, um, but they've been married for over 30 years. I mean, they really raised the children when they were very, very, very small. He had three, she had three, and then they had one together. So it was like a real Brady Bunch. And they came to me and they said, "Oh, you know what? The child that we have together is getting double. Everybody else has like their own parent. That child is getting double." I'm thinking, do you think that's going to be a good idea for that child? Because we don't care. This is what we want. The child always got more than everybody else, always got a car and always got the house and always got, always got, and always got. And I said to them, when you give it while you're alive, that's one thing. When you're no longer alive and there's nobody to be angry about it and they get angry at the child, it's a totally different ballgame. I'm wondering if how it works like that. I said to them, maybe just talk to him. Would it be a good idea maybe to just talk to him? And he did. It's always like a shock when people actually listen to me. And
Or
and
feeling.
yeah, they talked to me and they talked to him and he said, you know what? I don't want it. I don't want it. I want to be the same like all my siblings. I grew up with them. I mean, they were there before me. I grew up with them from the age of 0. I treat them as like my brothers and sisters, like regular. I don't care from which marriage they're from. And I don't want to have this because I know they're going to be angry and they're rightfully going to be angry and I don't want it, which is also something that people don't take that into consideration. They think they're doing somebody a favor because they think it's the right thing to do. But is it really the right thing to do?
Yeah. So this is like my thing. I'm like on a rampage about this. I love this. This is my favorite topic. And because ultimately it's not about the money. The money is so secondary. It's about how you're allocating things and what that says about your relationship with the child or the parent. Um, my rule number one is when you're doing estate planning is you can do sort of whatever you want within certain realms while you're alive, right? But when it comes time to the will, it sure better be equal all the way around. And I don't care if one of your children had an exit and sold their company to Microsoft for $5 billion. It's not about them. And you change them because they made it big. And you have somebody else who's, they're both teachers and they have no money. Figure out a way while you're alive to make the differences and help the teachers. Because once you pass away, it's your legacy ultimately. And all the dirty laundry is going to come out. It always does. And ultimately, they're going to lose. It's going to impact their memories of you. And they're going to feel shortchanged. And again, it's not about $1,000 here or $100,000 there. There's going to be something seriously lacking in their memories of you and of your legacy when you try to be smart, to outsmart the system in your will. Just make it equal.
I really love that statement because I actually have a story for you about that. I had clients, I mean, first marriage, only marriage, and they had two kids. They have two kids. And one child lives in America and one child lives here. And the child that lives in America, she was doing really well. She was doing really, really well. And the child that lives here was not doing so great. And when they came to me, they said, listen, we have one child like this, one child like this. We're going to give the one that's not doing so well, we want to give double. We actually want to give him the whole house. And then everything else, which is, again was like a little bit of savings accounts, a little bit of the bank accounts, not very much anything else, gets divided equally between the two. And I said to them, really is and the kids are okay with this? And goes, oh, she doesn't need it. She's like a millionaire. She doesn't need it. She's really well off. It's good. It's okay. Don't worry about it. But they did have a conversation and they were shocked by the response because she said to them, guys, I worked three jobs. At some point I worked three jobs around the clock to make it. And that's how I made my wealth. And I feel like I'm being punished for actually working so hard, whereas my sister did like zip all and still even living with you because she's so sort of lazy. These were her words, not like this were the word. That's what came back to me. Why? Why do you think that's fair? And they were so worried that they were not going to have a good relationship, those two kids. And because they were the only siblings, it was more important for them. They said, okay, you were right. We'll divide it evenly. But what they are doing now is they opened up, like they're pushing, the other one to get out of the house. They're pushing her to rent something. They're giving her more already now. But in the will, everything is 50-50.
Um, the other, I don't know if you've come across this, but the other tip that I can give, if we're talking about this, if you set up a will in your late 40s or early 50s, it really pays to revisit that will if you're in your 60s or your 70s. We had a case where it was probably 15 years ago. This couple said it's like you, they had a child in the US and a child here. And they said, okay, they're going to give their bank account to the child in the US and their brokerage account, which was with me, they'll give to the child here. And they started off with the same amount of money. They started off, each one had about a $500,000 with it. Well, the bank account earned basically no interest over the last 15 years, whereas the brokerage account is pushing $2 million by now. And all of a sudden, what do? And it's worse. It's even more tragic because the surviving spouse is not well, and it is what it is. The child in the U.S. is going to get $500,000, and $600,000. The child here is going to inherit $2 million. And they had good intentions, and they had a way. They thought they were, cutting corners and making it easier for everybody, and everything will be equal. But they didn't think there was no forward thought process about, wait a second, we're not really giving equal assets. And had they 15 years later revisited it, they would have said, wow, this is way out of whack. And one daughter is going to be getting three times the amount of the other daughter. And they didn't want that. But that's what ended up happening. So if you do it, if you're following the rules, right, you make your will when you're in your 40s or your 50s, do me a favor and revisit that will just to make sure that your wishes are still being fulfilled later on.
100%. That's so important. That's a really important point that you brought up about revisiting your will and updating things and making sure that they are, reflecting the current situation that you're in. As an example, pension accounts. Pension accounts are not part of your estate. So make sure that the beneficiaries registered on them are the updated beneficiaries. I had a case where um, the woman put her husband as the beneficiary in her pension account, and she got divorced. And 3 years later, she died of a horrible car accident. And guess who was the beneficiary? It was her ex-husband still because she didn't update it and it was just a pain. And there was a court case about it. It was a big issue. And it could have been solved really, really simply if she updated it. So I'm totally on board with what you said. It's so important to just update everything.
And a lot, I mean, we all have that same story, right? Where one of the spouses was in charge of the money, right? And and it was their IRA, and they had to whatever split it or whatever, and they end up getting divorced, and they just keep quiet because they know that they're the beneficiary, and the other spouse has no clue,
Right.
and they just like shoo shoo shoo, and then, hopefully they're gonna come into it. The other thing, which is real, it's important again with everybody, but it's super important in second marriages, is that somebody's got to write down, each person should write down the important information, which is their brokerage and bank account numbers and the contact person, their specific lawyer, their accountant. Because if you're going to rely on the other person, and maybe they had the online access, or the other the other spouse had online access and the kids don't, it's just everything gets frozen and they can't access the funds and nobody knows where it is, and they're still alive even, and the other spouse died, and it creates such havoc, and we're dealing with people. You're not in your 30s anymore. It's overwhelming for somebody in their 30s, let alone somebody for their 70s and 80s or 90s, to try and recreate this and figure it out. Just, I'm old school. I say, just take a little, I've got it right here, you can't see it, but on my desk I even have it, an old notebook with a loose leaf with a piece of paper, and I wrote out all the information. I think it's really important for everybody to do that.
So funny because I guess I'm old school too, because I also do that every year at the beginning of the year. I write down and on a piece of paper everything that I have, put in a safe place for the kids just in case, so that they know. Because you're right, the last thing you want to deal with is start looking for pieces of paper and trying to figure out the puzzle of the person's life and their financials, especially when they pass away. And that's like the last thing you really want to deal with right now. And 100%, I'm so on board with that. It's really, really important. The other thing that I think people are not talking enough about is having a prenup when you have a second relationship. A lot of people say to me, "Oh, I feel uncomfortable. I don't really want to do it." And I think having a prenup is super, super important in a second relationship. Do you have that issue as well?
You're back.
I'm back. I was talking about prenups. I was saying, I said a lot of times people don't want to discuss the issue of prenups in a second relationship because it's like it's money, it's uncomfortable, they don't really want to do it. And I think it's super important. Do you sometimes have these issues that you have to bring up because people feel uncomfortable with?
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to invoke the evil eye. Nobody wants to put the whammy on the marriage, on the first marriage or on the second marriage, right? And dealing, but these are really important issues. And I think for sure it's a much more important issue, the whole issue of a prenup in a second marriage, because you don't, again, you don't know. Nobody ever knows. We all hope everybody's going in, with a full heart, and everybody's going in, but you never know, and people have to protect their assets, especially again because your assets are your kids' assets or whatever, and you have to take the initiative. And if it's a prenup and it's a will and it's a trust or whatever, these are all things pre and post, that all add to that security that you're going to actually end up doing right, by yourself and for your heirs, and that there's no room for dispute. Right? We want to avoid that potential dispute. Everybody says to me, "Well, my kids are great. My kids don't fight. My kids don't. My kids are fantastic. We don't have to write it down because everything will be fine." And I said, you know what? Family court is full of people whose kids are fantastic, but they just, for whatever reason, decided to, challenge the probate, challenge the will, right? We all know, and like I said before, money brings the worst character traits out of people. Unfortunately, I live this on a daily basis. And you also do, right? And it's your job to protect people contractually through all this kind of stuff. And it's just so important um, that there's no such thing as the best of families. It just doesn't
Absolutely.
exist. It doesn't exist. And you have to protect yourself.
I always say, my elevator pitch, so to speak, for a prenup is first of all for yourself, to make sure that the assets that you bring in, especially in second relationships, when you bring in assets, that the assets that you bring in are yours and they continue to be yours for your children because you want to make sure that their future inheritance and their financial stability stays, the way you want it. You don't want to rely on another person to sort that out for you. You have to make sure that that's what happens. And also for your relationship, I said there's so many like issues that come up in a second relationship. Oh, he's spending so much money, or he isn't spending so much money, or it's his money, it's my money, it's our money, his kids, my kids, our kids. Having everything sorted out in writing, especially financials in a second relationship, so important. And then you can go off into the sunset holding hands and being all lovey-dovey because you've sorted this whole thing out. It's
Yeah.
done.
100% agree with you. 100% agree with you.
Yeah. I can't believe it, but we're nearly ending this thing. I just wanted to end it with like a story that I had like hot off the press, as they say. Um, Actually about a medical directive. There was an issue with the medical directive in a second relationship. Just to again recap, medical directives are for end of life medical instructions that are basically issued when somebody's no longer A, mentally competent of handling his own affairs, and B, is considered to be terminally ill, meaning he only has 6 more months to live, regardless. And that's by assessment of a doctor, of course. So in this case, there wasn't a medical directive, and the father was lying in the ICU, and there was a real issue because the children, or the majority of his children, wanted him to be hooked up to whatever. And his new wife said, no, but that's not what he wanted. He told me he doesn't want that. And then there was this relationship with, you don't get to tell us what to do. It's not your father. It's not you don't get to tell us. And then there was this even argument between the children themselves about maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. And this whole heated up argument that could have just been, it could have been dissolved if he just would have told everybody what
Yeah,
he wants, put it up in writing, do the right thing, and then you don't have these issues. Because as you said, what do people want at the end of the day? They want peace and quiet when they're up there, They want to make sure that things are handled properly. They want to know that their kids are not fighting with each other. There's harmony in the family. And they definitely don't want to leave their second wife and second relationship in this, horrible or yucky sort of argument with their kids.
100%. 100%. You phrased it beautifully.
Oh,
It's just true. That's what it is.
yeah, well, what can I tell you? This was amazing, as usual. It's always very nice talking to you.
Good talking to you also.
Thank you very much, Erin, for being with us tonight. And for all the people watching, I hope you took some important things here with you to heart, and hope you take action. Have a good night, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in my next podcast. Good night, everybody.